Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the first chapter of the first book of Kings, and we're going to try and make it all the way up to the 27th verse, but in order to do that, we need to prune our preamble to the bare essentials. The first book of Kings was originally enjoined with the second book of Kings as one book, and the first book of Kings, as we divide it, begins with the ascension of Solomon and the builder of the temple, and then the second book of Kings, as we have since divided them, ends in the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem and the exile of the people and the cessation of Judah as an independent sovereign nation. The line of the throne of David is dead, but if we approach it from the separation of the first Kings, it begins with the death of David and ends in the death of Ahab, two kings, and in between them, Solomon is the protagonist of the first 11 chapters. After that, there is a series of kings. It is the story of kings and prophets, the most prominent of which is Elijah, the true hero of First Kings, because even though Solomon is immortalized in a heroic lens, he is ultimately a tragic figure, because in the end he did succumb to idolatry, and this resulted in the permanent fracture and splinter of his kingdom. But this is one of the reasons why the Kings, now the material in First and Second Kings has its parallel in the second book of Chronicles, which is written from a priestly perspective. And of the two, we regard the Kings and the Samuels. The two Samuels are paralleled in the First Chronicles. We regard the Samuel and Kings accounts to be the more historically reliably accurate. The aim Chronicles is written from a priestly perspective, and the aim and objective of the author is to present a romanticized, idealized portraiture of David and Solomon, which amounts to a whitewashing. So we don't read of David's sin with Bathsheba. We do read of his sin with conducting the census, but that is providentially arranged, as was his sin with Bathsheba, who is the mother of his heir, the woman he originally committed adultery with. We're going to meet her in this chapter. But the whitewashing is such that David is depicted as infirm and ill and elderly and dying at death's door. That picture is nowhere found in First Kings. What happens in the First Kings is the succession, how Solomon ascends to the throne in the first chapter. He's not quite there yet by the time we're going to get done today. But it is altogether different from what we read of in the first accounts. The First Chronicles account, which is the story of David's rule, in that he, while still king, he names Solomon publicly as the king and successor of Israel to the unanimous acclaim, very publicly. But in the king's account, he is derelict in his duty. He is lax and attentive to this pressing necessity of naming an heir. And in his defense, the monarchy, the Israelite monarchy and the Davidic dynasty was still an infant institution. But now just because much of Chronicles is fictionalized does not mean that there is truth there, but we regard Kings to be the more historically truthful account. And so the opening verse of the first chapter reads, "And King David was old, advanced in years, and they covered him with garments, but he could not get warm. He died when he was 70 years old," so this is how precisely how old he is, advanced in years. Now this is the 70 year is the normal or average allotted lifespan according to the 90th Psalm. But David is so feeble and so infirm that he does not have the muscle. This once mighty warrior does not have the muscle or fat on his bone to stay warm. He is decayed and withered, so they try and cover him with garments, but that is insufficient for his needs. So his servant said to him, "Let them seek for our master, the king, a young woman, a virgin, and she shall stand before the king and be his companion, and shall lie in your bosom, so that our master, the king, gets warm." The only thing warmer than a blanket is a human being to cuddle with, and Solomon makes mention of this in the somewhere in the book of Ecclesiastes, I think the 4th chapter, about how two people are able to lie with each other and create warmth. One person is unable to warm themselves, but two together, it's 1 + 1 = 3 as far as warmth goes. So they fetch a young virgin and to fulfill that purpose, because he is a king and only the best will do. And of course, David is past his sexual prime. He's unable to even generate bodily king. So as we read, he didn't sleep with her, but she was still fetched because she was the most fetching one available. They scoured the entire kingdom, and they sought for a lovely young woman in all the borders of Israel, and found Abishag the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. So they were looking for a specifically beautiful woman, a lovely young and beautiful, and they scoured all the borders of Israel to find this one, and they found only the best. They were searching clearly for only the best one, and the one they discovered was Abishag the Shunammite. Shunem lies in the tribal territory of Issachar, and I believe that Solomon's, the object of his affection that he's writing Song of Solomon to, was also a Shunammite. But this woman, Adoniah, who we soon meet, eventually tries to claim, in the second chapter, he tries to claim her for a wife through the intervention of Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. He asks him through her, and this ultimately results in his death and execution because he was on house arrest. But his attempted usurpation, we'll get to that soon. And the young woman was very lovely, and she was a companion for the king and served him, but the king did not know her. Knowing means knowing her carnally or sexually. He did not indulge in sex with her, and even though she was very lovely and she was a king, and kings, you basically could get any woman you want, but he is past his sexual prime, so he is unable to. She is there to lie with him, and for that alone, not to lie in the sexual sense with him, to lie to generate body warmth. And Adoniah, son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I reign, and he prepared for himself a chariot and horsemen, and 50 men to run before him. While David is at death's door, he has not publicly or announced his successor, so Adoniah, the son of Haggith, the daughter of a king who is also the mother of Absalom, who himself attempted to seize the throne from his father, and much of the patterns are parallel in there. So this is a unilateral attempt to seize the throne unauthorized on his own initiative. I reign, and he prepared for himself. He is a self-exalting creature, but the self-exaltation leads to self-debasement, as we read in this. And he's getting the chariot and horsemen and 50 men to run before him, much in the same way that Absalom had done against his father. We read of that in the 13th through 17th chapter. We read of the division in David's family and kingdom, which came as a result of his adulterous liaison of Bathsheba, who the woman who he marries after she mourns for the husband that he has killed, and she eventually becomes the mother of. She is his favorite wife. So the practice now, Adoniah is the oldest living one. He is the fourth born, and so Amnon, Daniel, and his older brother Absalom were born before him. He is the fourth born but oldest living son of David. He is about 35 years old at the writing of this. Solomon is a mere lad of 19, but he assumed that he could exploit the fact that he was the oldest, and even though his father, he did not have his permission, and the reason is that we read in the next verse is because his father was loving of his children to the point of being lax in disciplining them. Now his father had not worried him at any time by saying, "Why have you done so?" Also, he was very good looking, and he was born after Absalom. There's no indication that the father was even aware of this, as the subsequent passage revealed. He is informed by Bathsheba, who speaks what Nathan speaks to her, and then Nathan comes in and confirms her story. But the reason that this even took place in the first place was because he was lax in his he was a sucker for his kid. He was a good-looking kid, but that as was his father, he was described as a ruddy young lad, and Absalom was also an especially handsome one. So much of the characteristics in the woman, and Bathsheba, of course, was a beautiful woman. So even though that word is not used to describe Solomon, genetically he had good-looking parents, but the sons of Haggith, the daughter of the king whose territory escapes me, she produced especially good-looking sons. he talked with Joab, son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and they supported Adoniah. Joab was the principal general of David's armies, and he came to rely on him. Joab was the one who led the troops into the field when David was not there to fight. David authorizes him to place Uriah, the husband of Bathsheba, in an impossible to survive military predicament. Joab was falling out of favor, and we read in the Samuel somewhere that David could not control him. He had fallen out of favor. He was, David was disgruntled towards him, but this Abiathar was a priest, one of the two high priests. He himself was disgruntled. He was the son of a man who had helped David. Because his father had helped David, David promised him that he would protect his son, and he was one of the two high priests during his reign. But he has since fallen out of favor. So far Adoniah has the leading general of the armies and one of the high priests. Not a bad combination, but there are a few people that are conspicuously missing that would be necessary for the legitimacy of this action. And he talked with, but Zadok the priest, and Benaniah son of Jehoiada, and Nathan the prophet, and Shammai, and Rei, and the mighty men who belonged to David were not with Adoniah. We read who was prominent and who was there. Now we read who was prominent and who was not there. This clearly lacked the substance of authorization. These men were all men of substance, men of power. The other high priest was Zadok, and he coronated Solomon, whereas David and Saul were anointed by prophets. Zadok is the one who anoints Solomon, and Solomon is the heir to a dynasty, the first one. In the subsequent history, it would have been common and customary for Israeli kings to be anointed by priests. Benaniah, son of Jehoiada. Now, Jehoiada was a priest, but Benaniah was a military man. He served as the palace guard of David. He was the equivalent of the head of the Praetorian Guard, what they would have been to the Roman emperor. So, of course, he commanded power and substance, and he is a loyalist. But I think it's Shammai, actually, the one who executes the three culprits that David commands or advises his son to execute. But Nathan is the prophet. He is not the only one. Gad accompanied David in the wilderness, but Nathan is perhaps the most prominent of David's prophets. He appears at three significant locations in the 7th chapter of Samuel and the 17th of 1 Chronicles. He is the one who issues to him what is known as the Davidic covenant, and that has its own story. We don't have time to get distracted into that, but he is also there to indict him for his sin. He is the one when David's sin found him out, it was through the mouth of his prophet with Bathsheba, and he is also here to assist with the correct transition of power, as was good for the kingdom, and it is his advice which steers and navigates Bathsheba to complete the purpose. Shammai would have been a militarily more mediocre man than Job, but Solomon was reigned in peace, and he purposely didn't want a powerful guy, military guy that he couldn't control like his father did. But he is the one who is entrusted with the execution of three people in the 2nd chapter after the coup and the conspiracy fails. Rei is a man we read of only in here. We don't know, but anything else about him. That name only appears here. But the mighty men who belonged to David, these were the prime warriors, the mightiest men of the battle, and these were David's special troops. So even though Joab, the main military man, is there, the majority of them that remain loyal to David are not with Adoniah. And Adoniah offered sheep and cattle and fatlings by the stone of Zoleth, which is by En Rogel. He also invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the men of Judah, servants of the king. The customary practice would have been of anointing a king would have consisted of mass slaughterings, mass sacrifices, and the king isn't even dead yet. So Solomon is attempting a unilateral seizure, and while his father still has life in him, he is implored by the prophet to intervene decisively in Solomon's behalf. But the location, En-Rogel, is the modern location of Bai-Orith, which translates as Job's Well, and it is south of the Kidron and Himnon valleys in Jerusalem. It was the site that harbored two of David's informants, Jonathan and Abimizah, during Absalom's rebellion. We read of that in 2 Samuel 7:17. But all the king's sons are there. They seem to gravitate towards the eldest of the bunch over the God in David's choice. Now, Adoniah knows that he is not favored by David, so that is why he attempts to seize the throne unilaterally and unauthorized. He knows in the 10th verse by the people he didn't invite. So that we read of more people that were not there. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, or Benaniah, or the mighty men, or Solomon his brother. We've already read of Nathan and Benaniah and the mighty man. Solomon was his brother, his half-brother, the son of Bathsheba, the unlikely and interesting link between Israel's two most famous kings. We'll read more about her when we read her name, but Solomon is excluded precisely because Adoniah knows that he is favored, that his father has privately, it is no secret in the family perhaps that he favors Solomon for the throne, so that is why he deliberately excludes him. And also some of the he has Job, who counts for something, and one of the high priests, but he also doesn't have a lot of people. His authority carries no teeth. Because if this was a legitimate coup that was authorized, the king's most prominent men would be there in unanimity. Nathan then spoke to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, "Have you not heard that Adoniah, son of Haggith, has become king, and David, our master, does not know it?" Bathsheba, we haven't heard anything about her at all since she bore the child Solomon, who was 19 years old at this time. She was the especially beautiful woman who had seduced David with his eyes, who subsequently invites her into his palace, seduces her. Now she is coincidentally bathing during her menstrual cycle, and on the palace roof, David sees her, so she's ripe for fertile conception. So a son comes through her, and he invites the husband of this woman in order to avoid a scandal home, and he tries to get him drunk to sleep with his wife, but Uriah proves to be a more honorable man drunk than the otherwise honorable David man was sober, and he will not bring himself to sleep with his wife while his men are at the field. He's that loyal of a soldier, and he is in fact listed as one of the mighty men in David's ranks, and so he was, even though he was a foreigner, he was a mighty, valiant warrior. And then when the lying doesn't work, the scheme doesn't work, then David just orders Joab to kill the father to avoid the scandal. And then after the period of mourning is over, he adopts or he takes Bathsheba as his wife, and then Nathan confronts him about 9 months later when the child that was conceived was about to be born, and his rebuke is actually quite masterful. We read of this in 2 Samuel 12. He presents a parable. He knows that David is a just man, a man after God's own heart, so he presents a fictionalized account of a man who a rich man who slaughtered a poor man's only sheep, and David says, "This man must die," and then Nathan says, "This man is you. I have given you everything. I rose you from the sheep pen, and you have taken for yourself that which does not belong to you." But Bathsheba, in any case, to suggest that because we don't read of her since, that she was not influential and prominent at court is to misread what we read of in here. She commanded influence as David's favorite wife. Now, he really loved this woman, above all his other wives, and the customary practice of polygamy on ancient Oriental monarchs. Sometimes, the wife Rehoboam exalted the eldest son of his favorite wife. But he informs now Nathan, even though he is not invited, he catches wind and rumor of this, and so he informs the mother, who is not entirely innocent of adultery, but certainly less at fault than David, to resist the sexual advances of the king would have been exceedingly more difficulty than your average horny guy. But he informs her that the conspiracy and the coup is afoot. And now come, let me give you the advice and deliver your own life and the life of your son Solomon. The people who were not invited, their lives were in danger, because if this conspiracy bore fruition, if he had the acclaim and the authorization, the usurped authorization, then he would proceed to liquidate the rival claimant. Solomon must have known that he was the favorite of God and of his son, so he wants what he's telling her to proceed exactly as I say, in the interest of saving your life, because if this conspiracy succeeds, then you and your son's lives are no more. Go immediately to King David and say to him, did you not, my master, O king, swear to your female servant, saying, certainly your son Solomon shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? Why then has Adoniah become king? The urgency of the situation is indicated by his word immediately. This is a pressing issue. There's no time to waste, and as Nathan has informed her, she is the relay and the link to inform David of what has caught the air and the wind of Nathan the prophet, and he knows that his wife has more. He eventually comes in to confirm what his wife has said. So David is ignorant prior to this point. But he's reminding her now. Some translations read vow, and that would have been a very serious thing. The vow would have been made before God that Solomon would succeed him as king. Look, while you are still speaking there with the king, let me come in after you and confirm your words. So the sequence is strategic. So the combined weight of his wife, and then for dramatic conclusion and affirmation, the prophet sets in, and this man would have been recognized by David as the mouthpiece of God. So he would take what his wife said a lot more seriously if he took what the prophet confirmed. He would know now in the Old Testament a crime could not be proven unless by 2 or 3 witnesses. So 2 were necessary here. And Bathsheba went into the room to the king. Now the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite was serving the king. So this wife, one of many, is going to the site of her elderly and firm husband being enveloped by a young fetching virgin. But she has a mission and a duty and an obligation to follow Nathan's instructions. And Bathsheba bowed and did obeisance to the king. And the king said, what do you want? Bowing in obeisance, this was the customary greeting when you bowed and kneeled in the presence of a king in the ancient world, even if you were his wife. So she gives him the due deference, and having satisfied that, the king acknowledges her and wants to know, what is it? Why are you here? What is the nature of your request? He knows that she wants something intuitively, and he asks her what that is. And she said to him, my master, you swore by Yahweh your Elohim to your female servant, saying, certainly Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne. Even though she is his wife, she calls herself his female servant. She has the due deference to the king. And he's reminding her that she had promised him in private that, and vowed, in fact, that Solomon, her son, would be the designated heir, the one that was born after the one which died stillborn after 7 or 8 days. The child that was born between them in adultery would be cursed, but the child that was consummated in marriage would be blessed. And now look, Adoniah has become king, and now my master the king, you do not know about it. there cannot simultaneously be two kings in any kingdom, although the ancient Spartans did function according to that model and pattern. But monarchs, mon means one, so this without the king's knowledge, his son had unilaterally usurped or was attempting to usurp and seize the throne unauthorized, and the due prerogative, the respectful thing to do would be to give your father the prerogative of naming you his heir and not seizing it on yourself while he is infirm and inattentive and at death's door. So he's an exploitative opportunist, and David is not aware of it. And he has offered great number of bulls and fatlings and sheep, and he has invited all the sons of the king, and Abiathar the king, and Joab the commander of the army, but he did not invite Solomon, your servant. He's informing her of something we've already read. He was greeting his coronation. His coronation would have been introduced by mass slaughterings and sacrifices. And not only was he there, but all these sons, implicitly every one. Now, he had multiple wives and many sons. The sons is plural. So Adoniah and Solomon are not the only sons of David, but all of them are in the corner of their eldest brother, and in most cases, eldest half-brother. But Abiathar, the priest, and Joab, the general, would have been people that would have been trusted by David. He trusted them to do, vital, essential tasks that were indispensable, that were to the church and the state of Israel. Yet they are there. They have betrayed him, and Solomon is not there. He is not present at this occasion where all his other sons. So in the family, it is David and Bathsheba and Solomon aligned against everyone else. And you, my master, O king, the eyes of all Israel are on you, to declare to them what is going to sit on the throne of my master, the king, after him. She's acknowledging that he should take the initiative, seize the moment to name decisively and with the full stamp of authority who your designated successor is. This is something David had neglected to do, and largely because the monarchy was still an infant institution. There was no mechanism in motion for which a king to succeed. David, the dynasty of Saul died. The sons of Saul died on the same day as their father on the same battlefield. But David was the first king to found a dynasty, and his 20 kings ruled on him in the throne of Jerusalem. But there were many dynasties in the northern kingdom, which split after Solomon's idolatry. Otherwise it shall be, when my master the king rests with his father, that I and my son Solomon shall be considered sinners. So even though they had done nothing wrong, they would have been considered sinners and treated as such, and the capital punishment was reserved for the sinners. That is what she's applying here. Adoniah is going to look at them as God looks at sinners and pour out his furious wrath on them, and there will be no forgiveness. They will be liquidated. They will be executed. If you value my life and that of your son, and your favorite son at that, and your favorite wife, intervene decisively soon, now. And see, while she was still speaking with the king, Nathan the prophet also came in. This sequence was strategic, and this is something he had already instructed her to do, as we read earlier. So he's going to confirm and affirm with perhaps more verbal authority than his wife what she had just told him. So they informed the king, saying, "Here is Nathan the prophet." And when he came in before the king, he bowed before the king with his face to the ground. As an important man, he would have been introduced. He would have had been introduced verbally before the presence of the king, but he is still a subject of the king, and he pays the proper respect. He bows face to the ground, the state of abject humiliation of a subject to their sovereign. And so even though he is the prophet, he is God's mouthpiece, he is still inferior in rank and station than the king. And Nathan said, "My master, O king, have you said, Adoniah shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne?" he presents it in the form of a question, whereas Bathsheba had more explicitly informed him of what was going on in the form of an answer rather than a question. He is asking, have you done this thing? Do you know that this is happening? So you're